And here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We end our show with a look at newly revealed documents showing how police partnered with corporations to monitor the Occupy Wall Street movement. DBA Press and the Center for Media and Democracy have obtained thousands of pages of records from counterterrorism and law enforcement agencies that detail how so-called fusion centers monitored the Occupy Wall Street movement over the course of 2011 and 2012. These fusion centers are comprised of employees from municipal, county, and federal counterterrorism and homeland security entities, as well as local police departments, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security. The documents show how Fusion Center personnel spied on Occupy protesters, monitored their Facebook accounts, and infiltrated their meetings. One document showed how the Arizona Fusion Center dispatched an undercover officer to infiltrate activist groups organizing protests around the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, the secretive group that helps corporate America propose and draft legislation for states across the country. The undercover officer apparently worked for the benefit of the private entity ALEC, despite being on the public payroll.
Democracy Now! Reached out to the Phoenix Police Department to join us on the show, but they declined our request. Sergeant Trent Crump in the Media Relations Department said in an email, quote, "Occupy Phoenix presented itself with a great deal of civil unrest over a long period of time. We monitored available intel all the time as it is used for intel-driven policing. Intel dictated resources and response tactics to address, mitigate, and manage this ongoing activity, which was very fluid and changing day to day. This approach ensured that citizens can exercise their civil rights while we protect the community at the same time," they said. Well, for more, we go to Matt Rothschild, editor and publisher of the Progressive magazine, wrote the cover story for the June issue of the magazine, Spying on Occupy Activists, How Cops and Homeland Security Help Wall Street. The piece drawing heavily on the documents obtained by the Center for Media and Democracy and DBA Press. Matt Rothschild's also the author of You Have No Rights, Stories of America in an Age of Repression. Matt, welcome to Democracy Now! Just lay out what you have found.
Hey, Amy, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, these documents from the Center for Media and Democracy and DBA Press show that law enforcement and Homeland Security have equated protesters, left-wing protesters, as terrorists. They've diverted enormous amount of resources from counterterrorism efforts to spying on these local protesters. And then they've collaborated with the private sector, some of the very institutions, banks, that these protesters were aiming at. And as you read in that statement from the Phoenix Police Department, the effort was to mitigate these protests. I mean, why is law enforcement, why is Homeland Security in the business of mitigating protests?
Well, I want to go to a response that we received from the Phoenix Police Department when we reached them for comment. And they said that they were not treating Occupy protesters as potential terrorists. They said, "We are an all-hazards incident management team. We have gathered information at all types of events, including the Super Bowl, World Series, SB 1070 protests, etc." So can you say how it is that their monitoring of Occupy protesters differed qualitatively from the other events that the Phoenix Police Department named?
Sure. Well, they're using resources from the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center, the Arizona Fusion Center, and they're using Homeland Defense personnel in the Phoenix Police Department to track Occupy activists. So it's a little disingenuous of them to say they're not treating these protesters as terrorists when they're using their own anti-terrorist personnel to spend a lot of time simply tracking these activists. One of the police officers who was on the Homeland Defense Bureau of the Phoenix Police Department said she was primarily spending her time tracking Occupy activists on social media.
We also asked the Phoenix Police if law enforcement is infiltrating Occupy meetings, and he replied, quote, "Infiltrate? No. Attend open meetings? Yes." Democracy Now! Also asked Trent Crump if law enforcement tracked Occupy activists online. He replied, "Yes, we gather intel on a number of social media sites regularly." So what about this? And also this issue of law enforcement monitoring the protests against ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. When we asked him this, he said, yes, public safety. Your response?
Well, they not only monitored the ALEC protests in late November 2011, but they also sent a face sheet to the security personnel for ALEC, a face sheet of the faces and names and identities of Occupy protesters who've been doing some activism in the Phoenix area to make the ALEC security personnel aware of who may be coming to their protests.
So the police are working with the companies and the organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah, they were working with security for the American Legislative Exchange Council. They were also letting security know when Jesse Jackson was going to be in town to join an Occupy protest and an ALEC protest. Is that really their job, to be passing information on to these private entities? And then with some of the bank protests that Occupy Phoenix was planning, they were giving downtown banks all sorts of information. Give downtown banks everything they need. That was one internal memo from the Phoenix Police Department when it was a day of protest against these banks, and Occupy was urging the bank customers to cut up their credit cards from these banks. And which banks are we talking about? We're talking about Bank of America. Well.